I'm saying a story, and you could sort of do it by rote, but I'm not present at that moment and something goes off. So I have to go, whoa, and get right back into it.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and drinking coffee to make sure that your tongue is working when you start to talk. And there's that extra sip right there I'm blaming it on the dust of the desert.
There you go. It is dusty out there.
Yeah, it's dusty. And the moisture on my face is not from rain, folks. Those of you who are watching us on YouTube in 4K, because that used to be a thing that you'd pop up on the TV shows in 4K in Technicolor. Yes, this is real sweat because I am in the desert. And I'm collecting dust to take back to Colorado with me on my face is what I'm doing.
You should have taken some of that moisture from Colorado down here. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Well, you ain't getting none. I already decided that. So, and Howard, you getting any moisture out there in the valley, man?
It's somewhat. I actually have the window cranked open a little, but I was going to say, so is there air conditioning where you are right now?
Well, there's desert air conditioning for the desert folks, but
doesn't work for you. Okay.
Yeah. And the house. Let me say, the house is built in '48, and the AC is not exactly up to par. I'll put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
A lot of mobile fans. I move around, so hopefully you're all right out there.
Yeah. Well,
it is what it is.
That's right. I can tell you, I've been through worse. But, we were talking in the green room, and I think this is such a great way to kick it off, the physical aspect. We were kind of joking about, Camden and I standing here, and we're in the same place, so we got a little bit different vibe going there. And we've always stood for our shows. And as we were talking, you were like, yeah, I think I'll stand too.
Great.
And then we started to talk about speaking and those sort of things. Yeah. And you mentioned sales training and even being an instructor. I'd love to revisit that, Howard.
Right. Well, I think I mentioned in sales training, they talk if someone needs energy, particularly if they're selling on the phone, stand up, change your physicality. But as a trainer, which I've done for how many decades in different size rooms, first of all, if you're teaching for hours and hours, I'm not standing the whole time. Just not doing it. But I found that I could sit and draw people in. It's the intensity of your voice, or to move around because it's, I don't know, like someone just standing there just would be like a statue. So I have found, now, I mean, if you're giving a stand-up if you're giving a 45-minute talk, you're standing, right? But probably pacing. You notice a lot of, not that comedians or presenters, but in some way they are, you notice a lot of them pace back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of different physicalities you could do, but you guys stood, so I said, hey, I'm going to stand as well. Give me some.
I would love to hear talking about, and especially from the speaker background, I think it's interesting, but I think about in terms, whether it's podcast, out coaching rugby, whatever it is, you think about the best way to get the message across, tone, all those kind of things. We kind of joking about the different mannerisms, that kind of stuff.
Right.
I would love your thoughts, Howard, on how much of that you kind of pre-script, like you're kind of joking about leaning on the chair, and it's like, all right, 45-minute mark, time to lean on the chair. Or is this just something that you kind of naturally built up over the years?
It just happens. I've never pre-planned anything like that. Some people this is probably a foreign concept for all of us, but some people don't like getting in front of a room and talking. I don't understand that, right? But some people do. So there's a couple of ways I try to get them to be comfortable. One, the whole Toastmasters route, Toastmasters where you go in and practice. The other one is take an improv class. You take an improv class, the whole purpose of improv is you accept everything that's given to you. Mm-hmm. And that can help be spontaneous. I can't plan when I'm going to lean in. And in fact, sometimes you have set stories, right? You say set stories. And every once in a while, I really got to like this. I'm saying a story, and you could sort of do it by rote, but I'm not present at that moment, and something goes off. So I have to go, whoa, and get right back into it. However that works. So no, it has. I think it has to be pretty spontaneous. I don't have it set. I'm going to do that. Yeah.
And is the logic with that, just to kind of bring it full circle there, because it sounds like the thought process basically is if you script it, you basically have to script the entire thing. Otherwise, once something's off, it's like, how do I get back to it? It's like, oh, was I supposed to tell this story now? And by not having it pre-scripted, it allows you to actually be in the moment, right?
Yes, and if you pre-script it, maybe I need coffee. Pre-script it, you're not listening to the audience. And it's not necessarily what they're talking, but you're not with them because you're in your own pace. You have to react to what they're doing. So I've had some workshops or classes, mostly, management training, which of course has a lot of leadership elements to it. But I really liked it if I do an exercise I've done for a while and someone questions the exercise. Initially I'll go, oh, this person's going to be a pain in the, but actually it usually turns out really well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just going to say I had that happen last week, and I turned it into something humorous. I was presenting about leadership, and I asked everybody to turn to the left or right and score themselves 1 or 10, and then I asked, of course, ones or fives or tens. Well, I asked if anybody's a 10, and this one woman raised her hand. And, I turned it into a whole thing. Okay, well, then you obviously got it all together. You should come up here. You should be, congratulations, you're successful and wonderful. That sort of sits. And she admitted, also came up to me afterwards and admitted that she was just joking and trying to give me a hard time. So, but that's that natural human nature that I think you get in the conversation, and not the one to peasants, the one to one, and the one to many. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a great aspect that you bring.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about before 2020, I never heard of Zoom. Sorry, just never heard of the whole thing, right? And I used to teach classes, not in person. I don't know about you guys. I prefer to be in a room with people. But hey, this is the look. We're not in the same room right now, and this is going brilliantly. So but.
So far.
So far, right. Yeah, it's a 10. No, not yet. Okay. But I forgot. I think it was Adobe Connect or something. But anyway, you taught a class, but you didn't see each other. So I know these people are here for 3 hours. Actually, it was convenient that it was a 3-hour versus all day. But are they paying attention, right? Are they paying attention in 3 hours? So what I did is I started Cam. I would say, okay, let's have a situation. And let's say you're in this situation. And Otis, what would you do? And I knew that if Otis wasn't paying attention, he is now, right? Mm-hmm. And so I constantly were using people's names to draw them in. And I found that was very effective. When you're not seeing the people. When you do see the people, you have that element that you could see them. And though, if they weren't paying attention, you also have to go with, is there a reason they're not paying attention, right? Sometimes they come up to you beforehand. I have something going on, whatever it is, because you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Otis, you must have known when you said that about the 10, that this person wouldn't have stood there and done that unless they like, they yep. didn't mind.
The class clown wants the attention. Yeah.
Right. And some people don't. So I think that's a matter, and you can't plan that. That's just who's there to engage. Once in a while, you'll have some people who probably shouldn't be there, and, whatever you could do. But those kind of things. One of the best ones I remember was teaching a time management class. And so supposed to start at 8:30, and I was going to get there about 8 to prep, and I got there at about 8:05, 8:06. and they were all sitting there waiting for me. See, the person in charge told me it started at 8:30, but it started at 8. So I was late to teach time management. Well,
you just walk in, Howard, and go, that's your first lesson right there, folks.
well, no, because I didn't know I was late. So I didn't know. And I'm like, and I started I had a prep while all of them were there and started joking about this. I mean, it turned out to be a great, in fact, they had me back a few months later. I mean, it was one of those because it worked out. So it really is, and I forgot your question, Otis, if I even answered the particular one, but it's really knowing, who's in the audience. And isn't that a part of leadership as well, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing who's there.
How do you go about finding the right individuals to kind of single out like that? Like we were joking of like not necessarily like the questions, and then you got somebody raising their hand a bit more, but just thinking of being in that situation and going, it's like, okay, hey, here's the person that I think I can make eye contact with a little bit, and light a little bit of a fire, and this side of the room is going to feel that energy, or things like that. What's your process there?
You just answered it. No, you did. People are not going to make eye contact with you if they don't want to engage. That really is, when then you started teaching, on Zoom. Like I remember I taught I wanted to go, I like Seattle, but, it's 2020. We couldn't go there. So I was teaching this company and I said, here's one condition. I'm not showing PowerPoints and everyone has to show their face. Right? Because I wasn't because this was a full on, I wanted engagement, and it was different, when they go in breakout rooms versus being in the same place. But people aren't going to look at me. And the ones who did, those are the ones who I would engage with until someone else broke in. So it really was about the eye contact, because people do learn in different ways. And let's be clear, we're doing it for more of the outgoing people, and that's why having work exercises, workshops, other people will talk in a smaller group, right?
I'm really curious talking about looking for the outgoing folks. What's your thought on the other part of the room, the folks who might not be as engaged, might not be as excited? There's a little bit of like, hey, just cut your losses. They're not going to have a great time. That's all right. I'm not going to touch their lives. Or are you trying to target them and bring them in a bit?
Okay, I'll bring them in. So here, when you're in a room with them and they break out into smaller groups, I'll go to those smaller groups, and that's where I can engage with them. Mm-hmm. And then they might engage in the bigger groups. To me, that didn't work online, because you know what happened when I would go into their breakout rooms? They'd all shut up. It's like, why? But that's how you do it. It's in the smaller groups. And there's also, and what you're bringing, I think a lot of introverts, whatever word you want to call it, get ignored with a lot of group activities, because there are some brainstorming, problem solving, creative, that's problem solving, creative solutions that you could do in silence. And that helps the introverts as well. Mm. Otherwise, you're just going to hear from us.
Yeah, what I'm picturing is I fell in this trap before. I'll tell the quick story of it. Out with the little kids coaching rugby with the Engage Foundation, and I have this great move of it because if you don't want to do this drill, you don't want to listen to coach. Well, then you don't get to play today, and it works really well when the kid wants to play. And then about 4 times now it's happened where I go, "What, Howard? You don't want to be here?" And they go, "No, my mom made me come," and I go, "Oh." Shit. And it's just complete. And you know what? I'm going to just use that example. What's your thoughts on how you rebound something like that? You think you have the punch loaded and you're like, oh my gosh, this is wrong. What are your thoughts there on trying to pull that person in?
I let no one ever say they don't want to be there. I'll say, if you don't want to be here, you're here, make the best of it. But you're dealing with a kid, right? I don't know. I would probably say thanks for letting me know and just go on to the next person. Yeah. Unless you really feel like you should engage them. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And maybe sometimes they might want to. I don't know. It's different, but that's.
Yeah, because to your point about the person making eye contact.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I was just going to say, like you're saying about the person making eye contact, you don't want to go to the person that's not making eye contact with you. In the same kind of way, getting that kid to go have fun is not going to be hold them up in front of everybody and try to make them the center of attention.
No, particularly, but because they said I don't want to be here, my mom made me. Okay, well, I hope you could have fun. That's all I would say, but I wouldn't put the intention on them.
And that's so great, in the world I came from, there was a lot of things that we had to do that none of us wanted to do.
Well, that's the weird thing for y'all. Yeah. We joked about this before. It's the weird thing with the military background of what if they don't want to show up to work? If they don't show up to work, they literally go to jail.
Yeah.
And so actually, let me throw.
I was just talking to a friend. We went on a hike this weekend, and they had a family member who was really young, and he decided not to go back to his report to duty, and he has spent like 6 months in jail and got dishonorable discharge. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, they ain't joking around when you sign that paper, folks.
So, well, and I'll throw this to you, Dad, and then I'm sure because we're good co-hosts, you'll find a way to throw it back over to Howard. But my thought with that is that's those folks where it's like they have to do it. It's hard to get the want to buy-in. It's hard to kind of get that actual buy-in because you don't want to just have the stick of like, well, you want to go to jail, man? That's not a good way to get, not a good way to lead your team. So how would you handle that?
Fortunately, I didn't have to, honestly.
I guess that's small army versus big army.
Yeah, small army versus big army. But when you do run across that, those kind of guys, just like in your company, that guy that is not carrying the load, that is creating problems, is creating divisions in the organization, becomes the cancer of the organization that you have to cut it out and you have to get rid of. We do the same thing. I mean, yeah. Hey, dude, you know what? I understand that you're regretting the fact that you signed a 4-year agreement and you're only 18 months into it. But the path you're going down ain't going to be the one that you want to be on when you get to the end of it, because it ain't good. And that's about all you can do, really. Go ahead, Howard.
At least in the military, it was clear cut. I had so many. We could discuss what's the difference between a manager and leader, and we're not going to come up with answers. I just think any good manager has leadership skills. So, what do they do with someone who's late a lot or sick a lot? And it's like, no, because very few companies have written laws. Few do. Some call centers, casinos, they'll have, if you are late 3 times in a certain amount of period, you're put on some kind of notice, no matter how good your performance is. Whether I agree with that is not the issue. If it's clear cut, it makes the leader manager's job easier, but most places don't have that. And they're banging their head against the wall because there's not much they could do. So I try to shift them and say, look, don't focus on that. What if they were late a lot and they got their job done? Mm-hmm. It might be different in the military. That's where I try to get them to focus. And then, of course, what they might say, well, what can you get? I mean, the pushback I might get is, well, how does it look for others? Or that's not. I had written a management book that's still out there, a manager trap based on what I taught. And on the back of the book, it says, what's a 4-letter word beginning with F that managers should avoid using? Now, this is a professional book, so get the word out of your mind. But what do you think it is? What's the 4-letter word beginning with F that managers shouldn't use?
Fail.
That's what a lot of people say, but you have to let people fail to get them to succeed. Mm-hmm. So what I say is the first 3 letters are correct.
Now we're having a spelling lesson. Come on. We're talking about having the day off.
Every day. He does Wordle every day.
F-A-I. Fair. F-A-I-R. Fair. I didn't want you to have to go A, B, C, D and get to the R. Fair.
I was on H.
Because what's fair, right? And that's a matter of being objective or subjective. And that's a lot of what one can do for communications. And quite honestly, that's why I really you could say that's pretty harsh. You've signed a contract, you could be put in jail, but hey, these are things that you can't, this is what's there. That is, and there's certain things that have to be there that way in different industries. And some there probably should be more than, in companies and things, not have it so gray. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Go ahead.
When you work with these companies and you discover that they don't have that clear standard,
yeah,
what's the next step in convincing them, or whatever method you want to call it, however you want to I'll do my hangman fill in the blank thing for you, but I'll leave them all blank. You go ahead and figure how do you get them to understand how important that is?
Threaten them. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so one of the biggest things that they can do, one-on-one meetings. One-on-one meetings are key. And I would always say to them, how many people have them, right? And some people had them, a few times a year, whatever it is. And I would start out by saying, how many of you have ever gotten bad news at a yearly appraisal, right? Who's ever gotten, how does that make you feel? And the goal of every manager is there should be no surprises come appraisal time. Everyone should know what they're getting. They might be in denial about it, but they should know what they're getting. So what do you do to do that? You have to meet with them. You have to meet with them regularly. And so I have an agenda that I give them, because a one-on-one meeting is a meeting. Give them an agenda. And basically the key ingredients of this meeting is for the manager to shut up and listen. Instead of talking, you ask the employee what's going well. Start with that. Ask them what's not going well and where they need your support, and where you get so much information with that. So that if you have something you need to bring up to them, you could use their words and as opposed to speaking. And so when people start using the agenda, because I've gone into companies more than once, or if public classes, and they come in a year later and I took my class, I'm like, but they're thrilled to be there again. Get reinforce some of the tools. They say the one-on-one agenda is kind of like the meat of a sandwich, right? It's the basis on how to do it. You can't convince anyone. It's just, I say the purpose of my being here is how many of you would like to work not as hard and get more results? Right? Because I honestly believe when you take leadership skills and you adapt them, you don't have to work as hard. So that's how you do it. That's, and some people are destined to do it. Some people aren't. If people want, younger managers, particularly in tech, they're very good at their tech jobs, and they succeeded with that, and they expect everyone to do it the way they're going to do it. They maybe should just stay in tech, right? And not do the other aspects of it. That's because it's a whole different skill.
So, you're kind of touching on something that we've talked about a little bit before, something I wrote a bunch of leadership articles last year interviewing a bunch of CEOs and HR directors. There's this hilarious thing that I've talked about a bunch of the amount of the HR directors who go, look, they all want feedback. They don't know where they stand, talking about the employees and, the lower level team members. And then I talk to the CEOs and go, nobody wants to talk to me because they're all scared I'm going to yell at them. And it's this really weird kind of degraded feedback system. And I would love to hear your perspective, either a story of a company that you worked with that had that issue, or, what your thoughts are on that. Because to me, it's just, it's silly, but, it's the golden rule we go back to. It's communication. Just like you said, you should be talking more often, and then it shouldn't be coming to that kind of a boiling point or feel like a boiling point there. But what are your thoughts on why that feedback loop is so jacked up in a lot of companies?
You mean that they got the feedback that people are afraid to talk to them? Is that
so my assessment from talking with these folks was that it seems like they're not talking to each other because they're both scared kind of from the opposite directions.
So if the leader is scared, that should say something to them about, if they're scared, they're sending that message. And that's why anyone who wants to speak to them is scared. So that has to start with them. That's why I say leadership skills can start with anyone. Managing up can be powerful too, right? If you want to manage your manager, and if your manager is uncomfortable talking to you, try to make it easier to talk to them. Then some people go, that's not my job. Well, if you want to make it easier for yourself, it is your job. Right, but if you took it the true sense of leaders, particularly if they're, the owners or CEOs, or one would hope they could see the cost of not communicating. Mm-hmm. I do remember I was coaching, so this was all on the phone, someone who was the chief architect of some company, very high up. They said they had a very important job. They told me that, and they could shift the change of how the company, this big company, was going to go architecturally, and they were all over the world, but people weren't listening to him. So we were having these kind of conversations, and he was pushing back on everything I said. So I think I had 2 or 3 sessions with him, and I had enough confidence in myself to think, okay, maybe I'm just not the one to connect with him, right? We can't connect with everybody. So I was getting on the next call to talk to him, and he said, Howard, you've been giving me a lot of ideas, and I've been pushing back. And I think the reason is because I thought that all that mattered was what I wanted to do. I thought relationships would just work themselves out. And that was like, I really could have ended coaching at that point. That was the big bell. What we did then is he followed the suggestions. He would meet with people, and guess what? He would ask them how they were doing. He'd learn what their struggles were before he said what he thought they should do, because it never worked. So for the leaders, it's interesting how some people get to be leaders. What's their background? And we're all just human beings. If they don't, you have to focus. We all have our strengths, and we have what we should work on. And sometimes you have to work on them live. Hey.
That's such a good point too. That real leaders listen and take in feedback from all around, right? Up, the old 360 thing. And I just in that line, what's something profound? That's a great story with the architect. And did the whole company? Were you able to see how the whole company's culture maybe shifted because of that? Or?
No, I wasn't there that long to see that. Because here's the other thing, though, that you bring up a good point. Shifting a whole company can take a long time, right? And that's, to me, unless you're dealing with someone way high up, it's more... you're dealing with each person. And so one of the examples I've used in a class is, let's say you lead meetings, right? A lot of people lead meetings. They don't have training to lead meetings, but they're leading meetings. You have 30 to 35 minutes of content to go out over. How long do you make the meeting?
Everybody does an hour.
Well, no.
Not up to an hour.
You surprise. I have some people who say 30 minutes, or 45. And the answer is at least an hour, right? Because there's 2 parts of every meeting. There's the content and there's the process. And you don't know how people are going to react. So I think leadership is all about process. And it's about, and it doesn't always agree with the time frames that have been set upon for the goals, right? So it's hard. It's sometimes, and then we also go off course. I mean, it's because we're human. We've all made our mistakes, and sometimes it takes a lot to build up credibility again, and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what your track record is. So, yeah, and that one, I have no idea how it went. They're still around.
Couldn't have gone too bad then.
No,
They're still around.
Right. Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit talking about managing up, but
Yes.
what I'm picturing now is these companies that are so either big enough and just so rigid. There's enough layers of things that are wrong, where they're scared to talk to each other, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so bad at that point where then even one person, kind of like you're saying with that guy, makes that change or wants to become the better leader. They're trying to manage up all those kind of things. The system's a little bit rigged against them, in that kind of a way. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think there's 2 pieces of logic I'd go to it, which is what you were saying of managing up and trying to be a part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the point of, like what we've talked about, Scotty Mann mentioned, of it's like you also, like, you can't really fight the machine when you're in the machine a little bit. You have to play ball to some extent to be able to try to make that change. What are your thoughts on an organization like that has those kind of systemic problems, and being the person in it trying to fix that to some extent, at least? I know it's a big one.
It's not that it's a big one. Whatever the Scotty guy said, it's like how much can one person do? And it depends on how much it bothers you. And, people think they don't have a choice. They have a choice. Right? If they're really bothered by the systemic problems of a company, now this, not the military, but if they're in a company they can leave, right? That's a choice that they can do. They can leave. I'm not saying leave every time, right? If you're jumping companies because, you have to look and see what you've done. But if you have done what you can, now that's easier said. A lot of times you're not doing what you can. If you go in, if you get a meeting with an upper manager and you go, okay, this is going to be trouble or hard to do, that's what you're going to get, right? It's like if you call up a customer support line and you expect trouble, that they're not going to help you, you're looking for that. As opposed to if you call them up and say, they're going to help me, you get that. So have they done that? And they're still getting burned on that, right? And what is it worth to them, right? Because that's, yeah, if it's huge and they can't make a change with it, I don't have any magic bullet that would make the change. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that companies with those problems when they change, it's because they start losing money? Isn't that when they'll do it?
It's, I've talked to you about this on our ops calls before. If it's this frustration that you talk with folks about, like leadership problems, the systemic leadership problems. Mm-hmm. And, we're, as leadership coaches, you're kind of the physical therapist in a lot of ways. We're trying to prevent this. And they're all like, no, I want to blow out the shoulder completely and go get surgery. They are not interested in preventative measures. It's like, you got to wait till the house is already on fire before you start doing any fire mitigation. And it's a weird thing there, because anyone with the leadership skills should be able to see those problem sets, but then for whatever reason, when you're inside of it, you don't feel the pain as bad. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because you have more experience with those companies than I have had.
I think it is you don't want to admit the problem is there. I think that's really what it is. You see it, you see the indicators, and you're like, yeah, but it's not that bad. And until the point that something happens, like, the VP of ops says, screw this, I'm out, man, because the way things have gone for the last, 18 months, 2 years or whatever, it's not the company I started with, all those sort of things, and they walk out. Maybe then that CEO, that founder goes, oh, now, if they are willing to learn and listen and not just think, well, Fred just had a change of heart, because of whatever, right? He didn't like global warming or whatever. You throw you make some excuse and justify it, as opposed to saying that I might have created a problem. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when you talk to people that are great leaders, they are willing to say, hey, I screwed something up. Let's see what I can do to make it better, as opposed to let's just work harder, folks.
You said something about when you're in it, you may not see it. And I remember a small insurance company. It's just a branch, and they were losing people, and they had me come in and they wanted me to interview each person on their own, which I was thrilled with because, I got compensated for that. And they even said, I think they might be afraid to come talk to us. So I talked with all of them. I got my conclusions, and I met with him and said, yep, well, they feel hesitant talking to you. And he went, really? And they even knew the answer. But, I think the reason is because we're all human, right? So you can know it, but you don't want to know it at the moment.
Yeah, just avoiding it.
Yeah.
Well, there's an interesting dynamic, and I think this blends into your latest project, your latest book too, is that inner circle of people and how we interact with our inner circle, the family dynamic, the guy that's been with me for 25 years, and how that can be so different in good ways and bad ways to a point where it causes a problem. Did you share some of that dynamic?
Well, since you brought up the book, which is, and that's what's interesting is because I took care of my brother, we took care of our parents who lived dad lived to 99, mom lived to 92. And for quite, years, they got more dependent, and that became more of my focus. And so the book is called Burdens and Blessings, but the subtitle is a lighter-hearted approach for middle-aged folks dealing with aging parents? Well, because there's a lot of humor in the book, or levity, I should say. And what I realized, and I wrote the book, Help Process Grief, but I saw a lot of people got value from the book. But I also thought, if I could have levity, that's the word, levity, about this situation, where can people have levity in the workplace? And how will that help their bottom line to get the leaders' attentions? And and so you're right, it came full circle, because I realized a lot of the stuff I taught, it is about levity. Levity doesn't have to be about being funny. It could be about just shifting your perspective, or owning up to, I made a mistake. What you said, that's subtle, gentle self-deprecation. I messed up. I think most people appreciate if their leaders say, I messed up. It shows they're human, and it's okay to mess up, because we all mess up. There's no one who knows absolutely what they're doing. At least I don't know anyone who does.
Yeah, no, us either. But what comes to mind is, I guess, a little bit of a devil's advocate type question here, but there's a little bit when it comes to like the humor of in like having that kind of leadership style, because I think I'm like that. You ask my wife, she'll tell you I think I'm much funnier than I am. But I'm always joking with things just like that. I even got but and self-deprecating.
Because she would tell you that.
But with that, there's this idea of if I'm cracking a joke, I'm not taking it seriously.
So that's not what necessarily levity is. See, the example of what you did, you weren't cracking a joke. That was, as your dad pointed out, was being self-deprecating. And that, to me, opens the door to allow vulnerability. That's how I feel that's what it is. And that's not necessarily humor. No, there's certain points where you can't use humor, but it could also be about how you talk to people. And even asking questions. Oh God, I don't know when. I was talking to someone, the first time I ever spoke to this guy, he was high up at a company, and he was based in Miami, and most of his employees were Cuban, and there was rumors they were going to close the Miami branch and they would have to move to New Jersey, and most of these people weren't going to move. And he goes, so I said, how can I get them to keep doing their job, working when they know they might lose their job? This is the first question they asked me. And I said, I have no idea. This is a while ago, because my answer was, I have no idea. If we figure it out, let's write a book and get on Oprah. So Oprah was really popular at the time, right? And there was dead silence. And I go, look, you're a smart guy. I assumed he was a smart guy if you were high up. So the problem isn't get this answer. The problem is the question you asked. Change the question to, what do I need my employees to do while they're looking for other jobs? It's perspective. It's how you ask, how you talk to people. And, we don't think about, this is part of the process I mentioned earlier. When we ask questions, the most common word people use to ask questions is why. And what does why do? Why puts people on the defensive. So ask questions with what or how. So I think that's a form of levity. And you don't have to be funny.
Yeah, that's a great point. I always remember Tony Robbins. One of my favorite Tony Robbins quotes is, "Ask a better question, get a better answer."
Well, I worked 5 years or so as a part-time coach at Tony Robbins. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier. So, and that's where some of this came from, right? It's the questions you ask. Ask a better question, get a better answer. It's very true.
Well, I want to circle back around to levity, because I think there's an interesting aspect back to my in the team room days with the guys when I used to do cool guy stuff. A lot of cool guys. Where we existed, what we did was this dark humor. There was a lot always. And this is, I'll throw it to you on the your definition of levity, but it is that dark humor, the pushback, the not as much self-deprecation, because it's a room full of alphas, but in the kind of the pushback in a different way, almost to the physical pushback sometimes. Have you experienced that in any teams you've worked with?
Well, Well, not personally. See, that's where that can be good until it's not, right? Because then you might not listen to people. I know personally where that with one particular person, but this is personal, where that kind of humor, this dark humor, and I can we unfortunately playing tennis about a year ago, one of our friends died on the court, like only in his 40s, right? So we were in shock. And so the next day we all go texting and calling. But I remember at the end of the next day, I finally said, I went to the end of the day, I was at a store and someone asked how your day was. And I just told them everything and they started talking. And my friend texted back, and were you on the 10 items or less line? And I thought, that's a way to alleviate, right? It was great. That worked, right? But there could be times when you really want to talk where that may or may not work. But if you have, that is a rapport that should be valued, but sometimes we could get a little, I'll speak for myself, could get a little unconscious with that, and when it may not be appropriate at moments, but hey, I'm human.
Well, yeah, there's that tendency to stay in that line and almost brush it off, and without going, into that rabbit hole. That's a problem with a lot of veterans and dealing with thoughts going on in their head in those dark places. That dark humor becomes real.
And I think that's like the joking aspect of it, having levity about it. I think, and actually, Howard, this is great to go back to your book, because that's only part of the process there. It's like you can joke about it, you can have this, but it's like if that is all you're doing, you're not going to have any success with that, right?
There's nothing funny about seeing my mother die at that particular moment. I could see the gratitude I had about that, but there was nothing that'll be with me, that can sit with me, right? But it's just part of it, right? It's, remembering like driving 6, 7 hours from San Francisco to LA after my dad broke his hip. And I stop at the apartment first, and she happened to be there. She didn't feel that way to just drop off my stuff. And she looks at me and says, "Howard, those shorts are hideous." And I knew she was having eye problems. And she said, "I thought you couldn't see." And she goes, "Howard, one doesn't have to see to know those shorts are hideous." I mean, that's,
Oh, the timing and delivery.
Oh yeah, well, that's really, yeah. Oh yeah, but I thought, I mean, it can't be. So this is a good point. I don't think you. Oh gosh, I just realized this. People want one magical answer. My mother wanted a pill that would make all her physical ailments go away. Who wouldn't, right? And I think a lot of leaders want one answer. Like, let's look at a PowerPoint. At the end of this slide, you'll know how to deal with difficult people. It doesn't work, right? People do come to classes and they want that. They think they're getting that. When in reality, the biggest thing they have to look at is themselves. Because if they have an employee or peer or whatever it is who, like, this person isn't working hard enough, right? Whether they realize it or not, they're going around trying to prove themselves right if they're working hard enough, so they could be fine for 3 weeks, then they're late. See, I knew it. They're not working hard enough. So it involves everything, not just, it's not all humor. It's one aspect that can help tremendously.
What are your thoughts? That example just brought to mind interesting piece of this that we were talking about, of how important it is to have that like leadership circle, whether it's inside of the team or other folks that that are at similar positions. What are your thoughts on trying to build that same kind of a system if you're the CEO and everyone is below you on that totem pole, and you're trying to get them in and have those more honest conversations and have that so you can get better as a leader and get that good honest feedback. But then there's that whole dropping down, don't want. I always use the example from my Verby days of telling too much sales stuff and having a guy like freak out, his head exploded, was like couldn't work for 2 days because I told him how bad the sales were that month. Like, and those kind of things. It's like, all right, well, that's not quite right. But there is an aspect of, if I'm isolated there in that leadership role, I need to build some sort of a team with that. What are your thoughts there?
They need to start first. They need to go outside to vent some of their frustrations. Not outside, just literally outside. But they, I could say they can have coaches, which I think all of us would agree on. But there are groups out there, as you probably know. I think is called Vistage. I had a guy who ran the company who was in one of my classes, and I think it was Vistage. This is a few years ago, and it was incredible for him because he met other people who were similar to him, so that he could talk about it. There's certain things that the one thing about coaches, because we've all heard stories, right? And I don't know how this is going to sound how much, if you want to hear everything from your employees, right? There's certain things that might be better that you don't necessarily, like if they're, I'm going to, well, no, you probably want to know if they're going to leave the company. But I think it just shows that you need some support groups. I did think of this earlier because, father and son here. I joined the National Speakers Association almost probably 20 years ago, and every month, then they had a business class once a month, and I took it seriously. If I was out of town, I flew in for it. And in between that, you had what's called a mastermind group. And there's 4 of us that still meet 20 years later from that group. And we used to meet a few times a year. But when I was building my business, I needed more support. And my dad was retired. And so he never was in business, but smart. He listened to me, and it was great help for a while. Then he started asking questions more as a concerned parent. And so I went back to my mastermind group, and said, can we meet more? So now we meet every Monday morning. On Zoom. And then we meet a few times a year. So I think that's what every leader needs to do, is to get outside, listen to other people. It helps tremendously.
What do you think, in the same kind of way, like we were talking about as a speaker and looking out at the audience, finding the right folks, What do you think is the process to finding the right people for that group? How do you know it's the right folks?
I'm sorry, finding the right people for what?
Like we're talking about that, that mastermind, whatever it is. How do you find those right people?
Wow.
If you go out networking, which guy you take out?
Wow. That's a good, I think we've been asked that, and we look at each other and go, I don't know. It's really interesting that, I'm thinking there's Trudy, there's Beth, there's Eric. How have we kept together all this time? It just clicked. Here's my answer. We didn't plan it.
Yeah.
We did. Yeah. And you know what? You might have to, we've had others, and then they left the group, but it's been just us. You try it. If it doesn't work out, you find someone else. Right. That's what I would say. That's why sometimes if you've done coaching, not every client, you're the best person. So you just go try to find someone else. But the fact that you're actively looking, you'll get something, even if oh, wow. Okay. I realize what I'm about to say. If the group doesn't work out, it teaches you something. And what it got me to say is the quote at the beginning of my book. A few weeks before my dad died, my brother talked a lot on the phone. He had long commutes in traffic, and he would talk about his job, and my father would just listen. And at the end of one particularly long conversation, my father said to him, Andy, it'll work out. And if it doesn't work out, it worked out. And he told me that. It was like after my father passed, and I thought, well, he may not have lived his whole life that way, but and I just realized you just try it. If it works, and even if it didn't work out, it worked out because you moved on to something else. But I don't know any magic bullet. I guess maybe it's easier if you like people, if you like the particular people. But sometimes you have to deal, and maybe in that you do want to feel comfortable with them. But when you're thrown together at a workplace, there are going to be some people you don't. So how can you find the respect and listen? Because if you just brush them off as not human, you're not really listening to them. Right. And you're not going to be a good leader or a good manager, and you're going to be banging your head and not getting many results.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that's such an important thing. And I love that quote. It'll work out. And even if it doesn't work out, it works out.
Yeah.
Such an important way to look at life and look at the aspect of how are we getting better, which means how are we learning? And, today, I would say one of the things, and unfortunately, I was reminded of it because we lost one of my brothers served with suicide yesterday. And, that dark place, that dark humor can hide it. And from the conversations I've had in the last 12 hours or so since I heard about it. It was that dark humor that, on one hand, enables us to deal with it, and on the other hand, it hides the problem that when we deal with it, put it in the box. So that levity, that dark humor is good, but we also have to be true enough to ourselves to see it, realize it in ourselves and in others. So
and being able to ask the questions of the other folks, going back to asking better questions.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing. I think of so much. Howard, just to say, I think of that so much with, like, my friends and dark humor, and I'm sure very different. I mean, I'm veteran adjacent, so I've seen what the dark humor is like, and I'm not that far into it. But it's that Howard cracks a joke, and we laugh and we laugh and we laugh, and I'm like, ooh, I need to ask Howard how he's actually doing another time, and we can have the laugh here, but it's like, ooh, there was a little bit of truth behind that joke that Howard just said. I need to follow up with him separately, and being able to recognize that in your friends and guys work with, I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I think you just said yesterday, so the fact that you're here. So I think, though, you're going to go through all this. Like, I'm not an expert with this, but you don't want to just have the humor, but you can't. I don't know how to avoid grief. Right? It's not, you could mask it in different, it's still, because I think it's not just, it is a part of life, right? Mm-hmm. And it's so, but it's all aspects, right? There's nothing with humor. I value that. And again, it's not necessarily humor, it's levity. And we could all use that and tying it in, and it will help. We're all human, and that can help people lead. One of the fundamental things I also look at is to remind people is everyone wants to be heard. Everyone wants to. So that goes, it's, there was an exercise I do with people. I said, okay, you've been talking to your team for a while on a certain direction you might go. You decide on the direction. You're having your first, so you decide on the direction. 1/3 of your team is going to love the direction you're going to go. 1/3 of the team is on the fence, and 1/3 of the team is going to hate it. You're having your first meeting after you made the decision. Which group do you focus on? And I have most people say on the fence, but you want to focus on the people who hate it, because not that you're going to change your minds. You've already made the decision. And by the way, if it's only 2 out of 100 people, you do that in a one-on-one. You don't do that with a whole group, but that way they get to express, because everyone wants to be heard. Even though they know, I do, even though nothing's going to change, mm-hmm. It feels good to be able to be heard. So, yeah, you're right. If someone's laughing a lot, at another time, okay, and if you say, everything okay, what's going on, it has to be it might have to be other kinds of questions to ask. I don't, So
yeah, because those are weird ones, because it puts the onus on them to bring up the crappy stuff. Where you can definitely frame that in a better way. I'd agree there.
Yeah, Ken, how about you? What'd you learn?
What I learned, and I keep being reminded of, and Howard, I'll throw this into a question to you, which is I apparently don't know the difference between levity and humor. So and we keep going back and forth on that, and I just keep getting reminded that I must not understand the difference. So I would love if you could try to explain that difference to me, and it might not work, but
you demonstrated it. When you said your wife says you're not as funny as you think, that's levity. That's not humor. Because you're not making a joke for the sake of making a joke. You're saying something that actually happened that everyone can relate to, and that's levity. That's the difference.
Thank you, because you saved me a couple Google searches after this.
Okay.
Awesome, Howard. How about you, man? What'd you learn?
Well, first of all, the power of when you ask the question, how do people high up, who do they talk to? The power of everyone talking together, because I'm energized right now by talking about this, but also the reminder that people, even if they know there's a problem, they don't really know it until something really happens that they have to deal with it. That's right, because I forgot about that insurance company I worked with, that they knew it, but they didn't do anything with it. So, yeah.
Awesome. Howard, how do folks find you, learn more about what you got going on? Check out that book you just published too.
Right. Well, it'll be long website, fulcrumpointpartners.com. And I have a page that I put in there with you guys as well. And my book, I think it's Cam and Otis, / Cam and Otis, or I'll look I'll cheat and do it right here.
We'll have it in the description too, folks.
Howard,
Don't worry.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I don't have to find it right now. And my book's there as well. So and I'm actually up. I just did an audiobook of it, and I'm in the process of uploading it. As soon as I get a JPEG picture, they'll accept of the book cover. I don't care. I have but that's how they find me. Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Howard, it's been a lot of fun hanging out with you today. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Howard Miller, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episodes, please make sure there we go. Please make sure to pass it along to other lifelong. There's so much here, though. It felt like a lot. That's it. But please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, you can find the full archive of shows at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.